Federico Allotto directs and co-writes The Spirit Chaser, aka Sanitarium. This is a 2018 found footage movie. If you're looking at the alternate title, Sanitarium, please don't be confused with another horror movie called Sanitarium. Anyway, what is this one all about? So as I say, it's a found footage movie and it takes place in Italy, but it is spoken primarily in the English language. Our primary character is an English guy who has been living in Italy for nearly a year, I believe they say. And he's met a girl out there. He's kind of friendly with this American guy who's also working out there. And one night they're kind of drinking and they are bet by a couple of Italian guys that they, to stay in this kind of haunted forest where there's legends of sinister things going on, and this sanitarium which has been long abandoned, hidden in the forest somewhere. So they agree, and as they kind of head towards the forest, they start to see strange things, dolls being strung up in the tree, things like that, and then eventually coming to the building itself, and there may well be entities dwelling within. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So this has been compared to the Blair Witch Project. So I'm calling it the Italian Blair Witch. And I can kind of understand why. It follows a similar trajectory really in regards to story. You don't really have all the kind of the interviews and bits and pieces that you did in the Blair Witch, but it's basically a small group of people tromping around the woods, effectively looking for this kind of local legend and coming face to face with it. But really, there's been so many found footage movies that are kind of like that. I don't think it's necessarily fair to say this one is specifically like a Blair Witch clone, essentially. What can I say that works in this movie's favour? I think the location shooting is good. Obviously, having a film in Italy, a little bit different. There's a long history of Italian horror cinema, but not so much in the found footage genre. And it is very accessible for English-speaking audiences. As I say, like 98% of this movie is spoken in English. But it does benefit from having that kind of the location shooting, the architecture and stuff, and some of the kind of the smaller characters, all who speak English. Again, it gives it a little bit of a just a European feel, I suppose. There are a couple of good scary moments in this movie. The movie actually kind of has two things happening at once, really. We have a let's call it a supernatural element to it, but also a more terrestrial element in regards to what's actually going to be the problems here for our people. And I think certainly with the supernatural element, which admittedly is the less covered element, you might say, I think there are some fun sequences in that that kind of end up being leading to something else. But I think they're relatively kind of well done, and I think have a couple of decent sort of scary moments. The general kind of, as I say, the design of the location shooting, all these dolls hanging up, again, it looks very like, typically of things that you'll see with this nature. But nonetheless, I still think it's quite effective. One thing I think this movie has got, which is maybe a double-edged sword, is our main protagonist is this English guy, and I have to say he's a bit of a whiner. Now, why do I say that as a positive? Because I think it makes this character seem a little more unique in a way, because he's not a particularly likeable character. He comes across as just whinging all the time, ultimately, and a little bit unlikable, but at the same time, he does come across as kind of somewhat down-to-earth and a believable character because of this. He's not some altruistic guy who's looking for the truth. He's kind of going there somewhat reluctantly because of a bet. And he just kind of wants to spend time with his girlfriend. He's complaining lots and stuff like that. But we never go into full-on arguments like you do with so many found footage movies, or at least not to a huge degree here. So I thought that was, you know, that was a fairly kind of grounded character, which kind of makes you somewhat believe the, you know, the character, and you go along for the journey. With found footage movie, it's kind of all about the immersion. It's about, we know that it's obviously a movie, but for this kind of like 90 minutes or however much long the film is, we just want to get sucked into a story where we can kind of go along with a journey with the characters, and that is the special sauce with found footage movies. And in that degree, I think this movie does succeed some way, because the character does seem a very kind of genuine type of person, not like you see in many kind of movies. And we see some elements of his life, his girlfriend, and things like that, what he's kind of doing, and his, you know, that kind of stuff. So which does kind of build the character up. But the movie does get going relatively quickly. We know we're out in the woods, and I would say around the halfway mark, this is where the kind of the stuff gets, you know, starts to get a little bit more creepy. So it's not all at the end. So the pacing for a found footage movie is reasonable, I would say. It's also quite well framed, so you do kind of see obviously stuff that's going on in screen. There is again a double-edged sword of this, but we'll come on to that. But for the, you know, you'll be able to see kind of what's going on. The movie isn't necessarily gory or anything, but you will kind of get a good look about what's actually the kind of the situation as it unfolds. So let's transition to what doesn't work, and I kind of want to just touch on some of the things that I've mentioned as a positive, but looking at the negative side of this. So as I mentioned, I think, you know, you do see a reasonable amount of what's going on. And as I also mentioned, the whole magic source of the found footage movies is the immersion, the believability of what you're watching. Now, here's the issue with this movie, and it's a thing I've seen with many found footage films. As our character is running around in the woods, panicked, being chased by things, you know, he's got his camera, and you have to think about what he's doing. He's like, oh my God, there's something creepy, but I'm going to kind of run away, but I'm going to keep it in frame. Oh, I'm falling over. Oh, damn. Luckily, I've still got my camera in frame. Oh my God, a friend's getting murdered. Oh, I'm screaming, but let's keep it in frame. So it kind of feels a little bit like that. You know, it's like, that's the difficulty with found footage movies. Do you have a believable conceit why someone is filming, and so many don't? There are ways around it, you know, people wearing like the cameras on their head and things like that. But in certain aspects, you're thinking, why is this guy pointing a camera at that, and sort of just like, you know, you can argue that he'd be holding it, but he'd be doing this while he's kind of running away and things like that. And all you would see is like the screen just like zig and zag. And as annoying as that might be, that's probably what would happen. So there is that the immersion breaking kind of situation. Now, the other thing I mentioned was the character is somewhat believable because he's a bit of a whinger. The downside of it, he's a bit of a whinger. So he's not a particularly kind of likeable character because he just seems ultimately like a bit of a wimp, I have to say. So you kind of, you're not, although I think his performance is believable on one hand, at the same time, you know, you want him to kind of man up a little bit, to be brutally honest. His relationship with his friend, this guy called Mike, I always felt like it didn't quite ring true. I have to say, I just felt the chemistry between these two characters wasn't really there. They didn't really seem like they would be sort of genuine friends, and I feel his arc, the character of Mike, the supporting character, is a little less believable, shall we say. What else can I say? So this movie ultimately, I would say, is somewhat of a generic found footage movie. I don't think it really has a real voice of its own necessarily. It does feel somewhat sort of typical in a very crowded marketplace. Now, as I've kind of alluded to, there are maybe multiple things that are going on, or at least things that are alluded to. So we have this idea that there might be some type of supernatural force at work here, but we also have more of a slashery element, is the best way I would describe it. And I think that element is less interesting than the supernatural one, if we're being honest. Now, had this movie expanded and carried on with more of a supernatural kind of overtone, I think this movie could have been a little more creepy. As it stands at the moment, when our kind of threat is revealed, so to speak, I don't really think it was particularly well handled, if I'm honest. It doesn't really seem massively plausible. It doesn't really seem as big of a threat, maybe, than something else which is unknown, and doesn't really have that kind of fear factor, if I'm honest. So, when it comes down to it, the movie isn't bad. You know, it's a watchable found footage movie. But I don't think it really stands out in as I say, a very crowded marketplace here. So as such, I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.